Neil from Essex here, out working on a project at home today. It's become kind of my, call it the springtime routine, to do a bunch of heavy landscaping in the springtime. Between cleaning up what the kids have wrecked over the last couple of months and doing some of the new stuff that is on my list of things my wife and I are looking at, I end up bringing home a couple of pieces of heavy equipment here most spring times to do some meaningful work. And this year we're going to spend some time here with this post auger. I'm putting in a number of bushes and trees here on our property, and I've got some big root balls to put in, and we're going to run a 36-inch auger today. So come along with me here today. We're going to run this piece, put it in the dirt for the very first time. I'll talk through a little bit some of the techniques that I'm using and exactly what I'm doing.
Essex, a helping hand with your land.
Before we get out here and start drilling holes, you're going to notice I've got a variety of augers sitting out here. There's an 18-inch here on the machine now. I've got a big 36-inch tree auger here in front of me that's 36 inches at the top, but tapers down to the bottom. Also have some small 12s, a 6. I kind of accumulate all the different holes that need to be drilled out here and then bring out all the variety of different augers. And I've found that really useful to not just come out with one size for the task that I have, but to kind of lump this stuff together, because when I put, say, different size trees, different size bushes into the ground, different ones call for a different size auger. The ones that I did here yesterday, I put in 11, I'll call them bushes. And it took me about an hour and 15 minutes to put all 11 of them into the ground. And they came with these sacks here at the bottom to kind of contain the root ball. These sacks are 18 inches around, and I chose basically an 18-inch auger because when you drop that auger down into the ground and it kind of rattles back and forth a little bit, the hole will open up a little bit more. And it was really easy then to simply punch that hole in the ground back up a little bit and drop the 18-inch root ball down into the 18-inch hole. And again, that's why I like having the different size augers, because we'll have the big 36 for a couple of trees that are getting dropped off, and then some smaller sizes as well for the smaller pots. So those are the augers, and all of those augers are driven by a drive motor. Now this is a McMillen x1975 auger drive. This thing has been around for decades. It's a very, very well-known drive around here, and I have it paired onto an SVL75. This is more machine that's probably needed in order to run this size drive, but I've been doing some other work with this also. You notice my tractor here beside me too. There are now more drive options coming out to be able to run augers like this on smaller and smaller tractors. So while this is a 1975, there's also a 1475 that is going to take a little bit less hydraulic flow, and even some really small ones now. Lampride makes auger drives. One of the model numbers would be SA10. These things can now run with as little as 5 gallons a minute of flow. So you're going to size that auger drive to the size machine that you have that's going to be able to spin that around and run the auger. And even down to the smallest, even BX series tractors now, the small subcompacts can even run hydraulic drive augers like this. Now the bigger your drive is, the more torque you're going to have. And if you did take that smallest size drive and hook it onto our big 36-inch auger, you're probably going to stall it out, right? You're not going to have the torque that's required in order to turn it. For that reason, I often look at these things and say that it's smart in order to oversize your drive. Even if you don't have enough hydraulic flow in order to run it, I would rather that drive motor have the torque that it takes to keep that bit turning, even if it's turning a little bit more slowly, and still get that hole drilled. Now there is a downside to that. If you can't spin that bit quickly, you can't throw the dirt off of it, and I'll show you what that looks like earlier. Oftentimes you run this thing down into the hole and you bring it back up with some dirt on it. You want that flow and those revs to be able to spin the bit, throw the dirt off the sides in order to keep your hole clean. So before I put this in the ground, there's a couple of things that I've done out here that I think are really helpful. In order to visualize what I'm doing, I have a pack of these fiberglass marking sticks. I use these things all the time for marking stuff in my backyard. Pick up a cheap 50-pack of them even. They're not expensive, but they're awesome for being able to walk around, stick them in the ground, and then figure out what you're gonna do. Once you wanna drill your hole, you can't drill through the stick, so I carry around a can of marking paint here that I'll just mark the spot where the stick was then before I drill my hole. The other thing too that we should know is that before you go and you start drilling holes in the ground, especially if you don't know the property very well, is to reach out to 811 and do a call before you dig. If you're like me and you're a weekend warrior, you know enough to get yourself in trouble, but you're far from a professional, it might feel intimidating in order to call that number, right? Because if feels like it's for the pros in some fashion. I've done it several times now, and they're fantastically helpful. It's a very, very easy, free service to use, and something you should absolutely do. They will send somebody out to your property really promptly and have them go around and mark where the electrical wires are on your property. I'm far away from that here today, so that you're not going to see those marks here on the ground, but it's very typical here. I've done it 3 times now as I've done projects over the years. Well, they'll come out and put flags and paint marks on the ground where the power cables are, so I don't accidentally hit something underground. So to get started here, we're going to take my stick, put my little orange mark here so I know where I'm going, and pull the auger forward. So before I put this in the ground here, a couple things about my machine and about the way I've got the auger set up here. You'll notice there's a cradle on the other side of the quick attach here that holds the hydraulic motor as you're traveling back and forth. When you go to actually drill into the ground, you want to make sure you rotate this far enough around that the motor is able to freely swing back and forth and isn't resting against the cradle. That's important because you want this hole to be straight up and down, and the little rotating thing up there will make sure that it's hanging straight. It won't be straight if it's resting against the cradle. You'll also want to keep in mind the kind of machine that you're using and whether your skid steer or track loader has a vertical boom or a radial boom. Now, when you look back at the back end of the machine where the boom is attached, you're going to notice a bunch of extra linkage back here. This is a vertical boom machine, so as I bring this boom up and down, my auger is going to go straight up and down. A lot of other machines that are out on the market often are done in radial boom designs. There's pros and cons to these two designs. We've talked about them before. But when you're going to run an auger like this on a radial boom machine, as your boom comes down, it's going to get closer to the machine and your auger is going to start to go off level. So potentially you need to be thinking that you need to drive forward with that radial boom in order to keep this thing straight up and down. It's not something I'll have to do today with a vertical boom design. So now that I'm ready to dig, when I go and I start to spin this thing, you'll notice it spins slow at low RPMs, and as I rev up my machine RPMs, it spins faster and faster. I tend to let this thing kind of go slow and work when I start to put it down on the ground for the first time. So we're going to turn the auger on, drop that boom down. Now remember, this is a tree auger, so even though you don't see that outside flighting biting yet, the flighting at the bottom is starting to cut out the smaller curved end of the hole, and we just keep letting this thing go down. Now as it goes down, it'll start to pull the spoils up on the flighting, and we just want to let it spin and work. Now if I manage to stall it, I might turn my engine RPMs up in order to get more revs and get more hydraulic pressure. There we go. This gets really hard when we get down in here. I would really struggle to dig these holes with a shovel. That's part of why I've got a lot of clay in this ground. It doesn't drain well. So now once I'm down in here, I'm going to raise this up, and I'm going to stop it turning, and I'm going to raise up, and I'm going to pull all the dirt up on the flighting. Now once I've brought it up here, this is where you kind of want some of that speed out of the auger, because I don't want my dirt just to fall straight back down in my hole again. And if I jiggle this thing around, it'll kind of fall off. So with the revs up and with some speed, if I give this a shot, see how it tosses the dirt off of the flighting, right? Instead of falling down into the hole, with the revs and some speed, you can throw the dirt off so it doesn't fill it back up again. That's my first hole. On to the next one. Another machine auger consideration here is complicated to explain because it's one of these places that safety and usability will kind of collide a little bit. You should never get out of a skid steer or a track loader or be under the boom of any piece of equipment, right? You always are running the risk that this comes down on top of you in some fashion. If a hose blows or seal goes bad or a valve blows out, who knows? There's 800 scenarios where you will see people crushed by a machine boom. Some machines will have boom locks that you can throw pins out that will keep that boom from dropping down if you get out from underneath of it. Some have them, not all of them do. But this is worth talking about here because an auger is one attachment where you can't quite often get out of the machine with the auger attached because you can't swing this thing straight out away from the machine. The cradle doesn't hold it in that way, and that requires you to keep your boom a little bit up off the ground. if you're running a lot of auger work, you probably know this and have run into this scenario before where you have that boom lifted up, and if you have a machine that has the very common swing out style door on it, you can't open the door of your machine because the auger can't drop low enough. That's a consideration here if you're looking for a machine like the Kubota that uses a swing up excavator style door. You can very easily swing the door up and out of the way and get out underneath of this thing if you need to. Again, we've discussed the safety considerations in that. Think through this process and make sure you're doing it in a safe way. You'll notice every time I get out of this machine, at the very least, I'm sticking the auger down on the ground so that it's able to support the weight of the boom if something were to happen. Start that auger up. Let it spin and just slowly let it work its way down into the ground. I don't tend to like to use float here, or really, if I can avoid it, actually putting pressure on the machine to shove the auger down into the ground. There are teeth on the bottom of these things that are there and made to work, so I'm just barely slowly putting a little bit of downward movement on that auger boom while it works its way down. When I've done these, I tend to like to over drill the hole a little bit because when I bring my plant over, if it's not growing straight, it's easy to throw a little bit of dirt back in the hole again in order to level it out. You're gonna see there how dry and a lot of clay is in that hole. And yeah, boy, am I glad I'm not doing that with a shovel. All right, it's same deal. I've got that drilled, so I'm gonna throw some revs on here. Whew, toss the dirt off. That's very cool. I'm gonna clean the hole again and kind of go back down a second time again. I'm gonna fill the flighting, bring it back up, give it that toss in order to throw the dirt off. All right, now next I'm gonna go back and do another one here that's straight behind me. This, I mentioned before, I did 11 holes in an hour and 15 minutes here over the weekend with an 18-inch auger. And one of the things that enabled that was being able to have them all in a straight line and just back up one to the next here as I was working. Having a backup camera on a machine when you're doing this kind of work is just a game changer for this kind of thing. The fact that I could just look down here at the screen and kind of make sure that I'm not gonna hit a fence or something that's behind me as I'm backing up from one to the next is really super handy. You know, backup cameras are becoming standard or expected equipment on most new machines here now, but even if you have an older one, like our parts department has a number of backup camera kits that are really easy to install on a unit like this that gives you that rearward visibility. And just, I can't imagine running a machine that does not have that on in some fashion. It just, to me, there's the safety aspect of it, which is obviously hugely important, but there's also some of that just operational improvement that I feel like you get when, you know, you can work in reverse so much more effectively. The other reason I was using this machine is because I was using an FFC preparator in order to clean up some of the stones and stuff in an area that I was out here in seeding. And that machine, you run exclusively in reverse when it's down in the ground. So again, like, I'm sitting there watching the backup camera the entire time as I'm running that attachment. So working here through the process, we now have these holes drilled in the yard, and my next step here was a trip to the landscape supply store. So I threw a trailer behind a truck and ran out and picked up my nice big order here, and you can see I've got a full load of trees here. One thing that I did not anticipate about these trees and why portions of this have not made it to video was that unloading some of these trees out of the back of the trailer ended up being a bigger challenge than what I had expected. I got some of the largest size trees that I could get from the landscape supply house, and I was really surprised when I looked down at that root ball just how much weight was there, right? You get a big root ball on the bottom of these trees, and these things have been watered well, the root ball was wet. They were somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 to 900 pounds a piece. And that became a real challenge when I had to take my tractor here and get those. I can carry 800 or 900 pounds with this machine, but being able to manipulate that loader up and over the sides of the trailer, try to get my pallet forks down underneath those root balls was a real challenge. And ultimately how that ended up being done was lining those pallet forks up beside that root ball and taking one of my ratchet straps here and tying onto the metal frame around the root ball, ratchet strapping everything back to those pallet forks and kind of rolling it back and manipulating it off the trailer. I'm happy the job is done. So now we're gonna hop onto the next step of the process here. We're gonna run the tractor over with these root balls, pick them up, strip these things off, and tell you a little bit about carrying these things around. When it came to moving these trees around, the best tool to be able to do this seemed to be pallet forks. The gentlemen at the landscape yard that were loading these things up, they used a skid steer and pallet forks as well to be able to slide underneath the sides of the root ball and then be able to pick it up and carry it around. I joke sometimes, you know, when we see tractors sitting out in the parking lot, and you look at all the marketing brochures and everything, most of the time you see tractors with dirt buckets on the front of them. And I use my dirt bucket maybe twice a year. I find the loader being a lot more useful for me and versatile with pallet forks. Doing things like carrying my trees or moving skids or throwing a grapple on the front. I very rarely use an actual traditional dirt bucket, which I think is ironic because that is how tractors are typically sold and marketed. So very simply here, all we're gonna do is slide our forks on and out on the pallet fork frame here till they're roughly the size of the bottom of that root ball, slide underneath of it, and then wiggle it over here to our hole. Now first, my holes, you're gonna notice here that, one, they're filled with water because it rained a lot this morning, but also they're much larger than what my root ball is. You know, when you look at planning recommendations for this kind of stuff, you usually aren't supposed to drill a hole the exact size of what your root ball is. You're always supposed to over drill these things because you end up with good soft soils around that root ball that are easy for the roots to be able to grow out into. Another thing that I found too, and the other ones that I've done here so far, is I feel like it makes leveling these trees a little bit easier. When you have more room inside that hole, you have that kind of soft curved bottom to it. Taking the tree and be able to wiggle it around until you find level is easier when you're not as constrained by the sides of the hole. So usually the recommendation here is to over drill these things a little bit. I also went too deep. So I'm gonna fill this thing in a little bit, then we're gonna drop the tree in the hole. So we're simply gonna bring our pallet forks over here, slide them down on the ground, and then slide underneath the root ball. Again, weight-wise, this is way beyond what I could just move by carrying it around. And slide it back over here over top of our hole. And we gotta go back in four-wheel drive. And curl that in, drop our pallet forks and back up. And you can see I got my wire mesh in there. I'm gonna use a tow strap in my loader here in order to pull that out, because I didn't really want to drop that in the hole. I got the burlap in too. Let's not be fooled to think that like every one of these things is a perfect demonstration of, right? If you were watching some snazzy manufacturer video, they wouldn't show the fact that you threw the burlap and the wire down into the water. But here you get it all. All right, so there's that. Now, with that done, I'll come over here and grab the trunk and stand this guy up a little bit. We'll settle it down and we'll start to backfill this with dirt. So that's a little bit on my weekend work. All of these implements are easy pieces to run that don't require huge amounts of technique. And if you've got a big project like this, running these things to the front of your equipment can make a lot of sense. Having the right tools for a job makes this kind of stuff maybe doable, where you might come out and hire a contractor otherwise. I personally take a lot of pride in being able to look at what I've done here for a weekend and appreciate that for years to come, right? I like doing my own projects and the satisfaction that comes along with that. So you could use a rental piece to get some jobs like this done. You're shopping for a new piece of equipment, or you need parts or service for a machine you've already got. Give us a call at Messick's. We're available at 800-222-3373 or online at messick's.com.